Okay, so chapter 13, the old regime, absolutism and enlightenment. And this is going to be part 4, and this is going to cover the Enlightenment. So really the guy who kind of sets it off is John Locke, and he's going to be mentioned throughout this whole part. So he's one of the most influential writers in this period. He challenged both divine right theory and the view of Hobbes. Remember, Hobbes believed that people were actually bad and that you needed a strong king to keep people in line. Locke believed that governments attain their power from the people that they govern, not from God. So that separates from the divine right. So according to Locke, individuals are free in a state of nature, but they join to form a community, like early on a village, to protect themselves, which is true. The community then hands over power to this government, and they have a social contract with the government. So the main purpose of the government was therefore to protect life, liberty, and property. So Locke defended a people's right to revolt when the government abused its power. So if they abused their power, they were breaking their social contract with the people. So his ideas were influential beyond this period in which he wrote, and centuries later, his writings really influenced the leaders of the American and the French Revolution. So remember that life, liberty, and property, that's what the government is there to protect. All right, so Sir William Blackstone, he's an English judge. And what he did is he summarized the English law in his commentaries of laws of England. So kind of like the Code of Justinian, he takes all of the English laws and simplifies them and kind of expands on them on what's the real meaning of the English law. So the book explained the English common law. It's a system based on a judge following the precedents of other courts. So what happens in a court when you have a ruling, that's precedent. So in other words, if someone breaks the law and a judge ruled a certain way, when I come later on as a judge, I'm going to say, well, in precedence, this is how that judge ruled, and this is the way I see it. And so you're going to follow what comes before you, what precedes you in the court of law. So Blackstone defined the right of individuals in English law as well as property rights. They were really worried about property rights because the kings at that time before this could actually come in and take anyone's land if they wanted to. So he's worried about property rights that could not be violated even by a king. He also explained England's mixed monarchy, so he explained how it's working and where power was shared by the king and by the parliament. And then you have the scientific revolution. So the roots of the scientific revolution can be found in the Renaissance with the work of Copernicus, Galileo, which you see here down at the bottom. So Copernicus on the left, Galileo in the middle, and then Harvey, which explained the circulation of blood through the body. So those are the scientists, and there was other ones, of course. So the scientific revolution continued through the 17th and 18th century. It rejected the traditional authority of the church teachings in favor of direct observation of nature. So believing on science rather than blind faith in what the church is teaching. So the revolution in science was based on new scientific method, which is what you use in your science class, in which people observe nature. They make a hypothesis, which is an educated guess on the relationship between two things. What's going to happen if you put two things together in nature? And then they test their hypothesis. They say, okay, this is what I think is going to happen through experiments, and they write those down. So Galileo, for example, conducted tests on the motion of objects to find general principles of physics. And scientists began to discover that the motions of objects could be predicted by mathematics. So they use math to predict how things are going to move, how fast they're going to move, how slow they're going to move, and things like that. Then you have Sir Robert Boyle, who is an Irish chemist, and he's sometimes known as the father of chemistry. So Boyle conducted experiments on gases at different temperatures and pressures. So he heated up gases and he cooled them down, which makes them expand and contract and cause pressure and things like that. So he found gas pressure increased as the volume of gas decreased. So when you heat something up, it actually gets lighter, the volume gets less, but it puts more pressure. That's really how we use our cars today with gasoline engine. So he also distinguished mixtures from compounds. Boyle was one of the first scientists to perform controlled experiments, and then he published his work in detail on what exactly he found. Sir Isaac Newton. So the most influential thinker of the scientific revolution was Sir Isaac Newton. His book, Principles of Mathematics, connected the speed of falling objects on the earth to the movements of planets. Okay, so how fast your planet spins gives you your gravity, actually, how fast things fall to the Earth. So Newton reduced all these patterns to a single formula, which is called the law of gravity. So Newton's discovery raised hopes that all the universe acted according to his law of gravity, and to certain fixed fundamental laws. So everything could be figured out. It was the big thing. It seemed that all scientists had to do was apply observation, then experimentation, and then mathematics, and you could solve all of the riddles of the Earth. So here's one of his telescopes. As you can see, it's an exact copy in the painting. And then here's a prism. So not only was he the one who had the apple fall on his head, he had a lot of different things that he did. All right, and then the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment refers to an important movement in the 18th century in European thought, and the spark in the Enlightenment came from the progress made during the scientific revolution. So Enlightenment thinkers believe that by applying reason and scientific laws, people would be better able to understand both nature and one another. So you could use this in relationships with people. You could use science. So they applied the new scientific method to society and its problems. So they thought that kings and things like that were the problems. So they were going to use scientific method to figure out these problems. So at the core of the Enlightenment was the question of traditional institutions, customs, and morals. In particular, they questioned the divine right of kings. They questioned the hereditary privileges of the nobles, to where you're born a noble and you're always going to be a noble no matter what, and the power of the Catholic Church. So enlightened philosophers believe that nature and society operated according to certain basic universal principles, which they called natural laws. Okay, so almost like common sense things that are going to happen no matter what. So they further believe that people could use their reason to discover these laws and then apply this knowledge to improve the quality of life. So again, John Locke, we've talked about him already. He believed that government's power is limited, and people have natural rights, such as these are the things that everybody has: the right to life, liberty, and property. And then Montesquieu was also a Frenchman, or is a Frenchman, and he believed that the powers of government should be separated into different branches, just like the United States has. So the United States has the three branches of government. And then Rousseau believed that government should express the will of the people. People enter into a social contract, just like Locke said, with their government, giving it the right to create and enforce laws to protect them. So enlightenment and the roots of democratic republican government, which is what we have. So this is kind of where we get our government ideas from. Many of the Enlightenment thinkers were French. They were influenced by earlier French Protestants who, following John Calvin, had argued that the citizens could challenge the actions of an ungodly king. So they were also impressed by the ideas of John Locke, who had written that each of us is born a blank slate. So this was a whole new thing, because they believed that nobles were better than anyone else at birth. So you were born a noble, you were born superior to other people. So where John Locke thought everybody was a blank slate. So our experiences then shape our personalities. This might mean that a peasant could be just as good as a nobleman if he had the same experiences as that nobleman, which is true. So Enlightenment thinkers were also influenced by earlier wars of religion. They couldn't believe that there was actually, Protestants and Catholics fighting each other. So to avoid this senseless killing, they favored religious toleration. So everyone pretty much equal. You can practice whatever religion that you want. Again, that's a American idea also, and this is where we get it from. So they opposed the torture during judicial proceedings. So what happens a lot of times in the past is if you were arrested, you were tortured until you said, yes, I did it. So many of the things that happened in France is what they kind of turned on. So the privileged nobility, the powerful church, and the absolute kings, they were against all those things. They thought that those things were irrational. All right, so Voltaire, he poked fun at traditional authority in society, government, and the church. So he made fun of those three things. His views on religious toleration and intellectual freedom influenced the leaders of the American French Revolution. So he's a big impact on the French and American Revolution. Rousseau, which we talked about earlier, believed that government should express the general will of the people. Okay, and a lot of his ideas actually inspire the French Revolution. Montesquieu argued that a separation of powers in government as a check against tyranny. So a check against absolute king. So you had to split up the government into branches. And then Adam Smith, he's the one who describes capitalism in his book, which is called The Wealth of Nations. So we get a lot of ideas from these four Enlightenment thinkers. And then the Declaration of Independence. So Enlightenment ideas were applied by Thomas Jefferson and the American Declaration of Independence. The Declaration recognized the existence of natural laws. There it is, John Locke, such as the right to life, liberty, and this is where it changes, the pursuit of happiness. So it stated that the purpose of government was to protect these rights. This demonstrated a strong influence of Locke and on the colonial thinking. So here's three of the main American Enlightenment thinkers: Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Paine. And then enlightened despots. These are kings and queens that are enlightened. They know what the Enlightenment is. They agree with the Enlightenment, but they don't give up any of their power. So Enlightenment despots were absolute monarchs who tried to use Enlightenment ideas to reform the societies from above. So they're not changing. So like in Russia, they're not changing the life of the serfs. They're changing from the top down. So from the king, queen to the nobles. They often came from countries without a strong middle class, like Russia. They felt it was up to the ruler to introduce positive changes. They instituted religious toleration, so they did some good things. They established scientific academies, and they prompted social reform, but they rarely gave up any of their absolute power. And Catherine the Great of Russia, which is there on the left, Frederick the Great of Prussia in the middle, and Joseph II of Austria are examples of enlightened despots. All right, so going over some of these main characters. Louis XIV, absolutism, a great example of it, brought nobles under his control at the palace, and he's from France. Peter the Great from Russia, he expanded Russia. He was a czar, and he was an absolute ruler. Hobbes believed that people were not good. They needed a strong king to control the country. John Locke was against divine right. He was against what Hobbes said. And people had the right to life, liberty, and property. And then Montesquieu, he believed in the separation of power of government. So he believed in the branches of government, just like the three branches that we have. And then Rousseau, went too far. And then Rousseau believed in democratic ideas. He's the one who brought the democratic ideas of the French Revolution. And he said the government should be the will of the people.